Good morning. It's Tom Padula from TomPadulaTV on YouTube and Insegna Booksellers. And today is an important day. We're getting closer and closer to the new year. So we finish off with 2022. How was it for you? For me, it's been a pretty good year. But, it depends. Life is so varied for individuals and for groups of people and nations, continents. The whole world doesn't give us everything in the positive all the time. But we hope for the positive, and we want to do better in the future. And the future of yesterday is today. So here I am looking at world history. It'll be program 63, lesson 63. It's a lesson, a presentation, a podcast, depending on which of the platforms you look up Tom Padula, world history. If you go to insegna.com, it's a website. So if you go to YouTube, it's a podcast. If you go to TomPadula.blogspot.com, then it's a presentation. And of course, it's a lesson if you go to Facebook. It's all it encompasses everything. Today I'm going to look at the voyages of discovery, which means it's a turning point in history. The voyages of discovery that happened in the 15th century, that's the 1400 to 1499. In that frame of time, in that particular century, really changed the world. It brought the world closer. It's sort of the unknown lands became known. And there's a lot of discovery to be done. Just a few people, a few pioneers, they sort of show the way. And then the others, of course, follow and improve on what has gone on before. So the aim of, fatherhood, motherhood is to produce children for the future. Of course, not everyone can, but those ones who can't, then they can help out and think positively about children in general. And, we didn't get to 8 billion people in the world without trying. Just 120 years ago, there was less than 3 billion in the world. Who knows what's in the future? Because history has taught us that the future from today is not always in the positive. Sometimes people go backwards in terms of their civilization, what they know. So let's hope for the best, because now with Tom Padula going on this Facebook live presentation, not just Tom Padula, but how many more people are doing it? Millions of people are doing it. And it's fantastic that we share this knowledge and that we realize that we're not isolated, that we live in a world that needs our good heart in order to have peace and harmony. That's what we wish ourselves for the new year, don't we? Prosperity, harmony, love, all these elements here. And we want to start them off with a big bang, the fireworks. That's wonderful. Let's hope that the weather is good in Melbourne, because Melbourne does put a big show on New Year's Eve. Generally, we've missed out for a couple of years, but I've always enjoyed going to the city and just walk around with that huge crowd. It's fantastic. A bit of humanity. Let's keep it safe, and let's keep it, with a smile on our face. That's the main thing. Now today I'm going to do, as I said, Voyages of Discovery. Then I'll go to China again, and I recommend on Netflix The Empire of Qin. It's because that covers the Zhou dynasty. That's when it came about. After the Shang dynasty, there's the Zhou dynasty. Welcome to Lily Allen. The Zhou dynasty, it was an important dynasty for China after the Shang, and after that will be the Han dynasty. So, I'm becoming familiar now with Chinese history, and you can't become familiar unless you take an interest in it. And let's face it, when you study China, you'll understand it, the modern China even more. If you do the history part, you'll get there. The one of the continents that was neglected, I didn't do it on purpose, is Africa, which I'm covering at the moment. And today we're going to look at a few more states, just briefly, but we're going to cover them. And then we got to before the invasion again, before the Europeans arrived in Australia and settled here. That's Captain Arthur Phillips started the ball rolling there, not Captain Cook. Captain Cook came and went like our tourists. They come, they see, they go. You only invade a country when you stay in it. And then you become part of it. And of course, after that, there'll be Banjo Patterson and also, what's his name? Gosh, unbelievable. Banjo Patterson. And then, let me have a look. How can I forget him? Henry Lawson. There you are, from one moment to the other. The Italians would say, La vecchiaia si avvicina. Old age is coming close. Or if it's not already here. Oh, well, never mind. And then we got to my travels to Broome this year. Now, because I'm travelling quite a bit this year, thanks to a lady called Angela Popola, who has been organising bus tours for 25 years, I've been able to, travelling too far these days, not my way. Sunda Lombardi. So anyone who wants to go see Australia, we have beautiful bus tours all around. Join them, go. And of course, they got to make some money too. So don't worry if you spend a bit much or if things change along the way. It's all part of it. Okay, so it's 11:32. I've sort of gone over time. I've gone over time to start, but here we go. Voyages of Discovery. Fall of Constantinople strangles the spice trade. That's when the Ottoman Empire began after the Seljuk and the Mongolian invasions. Here we go. The fall of the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, came to a halt. We have still to learn something about the most exciting of all Renaissance discoveries, the discovery of a whole new world. You remember how Marco Polo's journey led to a great increase in the caravan trade between East and West, along the spice routes, etc., which had been there for a long time. But his dad and uncle came there, and they had been there before, and they took the young man wanted to go with his famous father. And I am watching him right now, Marco Polo, the second time around on Netflix. And it's a pity that Weinstein ended up the way he did, because, instead of five series, we've only got 2 of them. I hope someone else picks it up and continues, because, that's really important for the world to know a lot more about the Mongolian Empire and the dream of the world by the great Khan. Okay. When the Turks captured Constantinople in 1453, they captured most of this trade from India to Turkey and then to Europe. Rich Europeans who had become accustomed to using pepper, sugar, silks, nutmeg and other Asiatic luxuries began to look for a new way of reaching India. So that started the ball rolling with the discoveries. There's always an underlying reason why people do what they do. Prince Henry and Vasco da Gama find a new way to India, 1498. A brother of the King of Portugal, Prince Henry the Navigator, thought that ships might be able to reach India by sailing south along the African coast. The ships of those days were smaller than modern ferry boats. Nevertheless, as their craft were, by the 15th century, equipped with compasses from China, Again, rudders and log lines for measuring the distance travelled, these Portuguese seamen of the Renaissance soon outsailed even the Vikings. The Vikings were the big, the big ones, and I've watched all of the Viking series as well on Netflix. So it's important to have a good look at it. A lot of fun. Welcome to Assunta Lombardia. Portuguese find the Spice Island. In 1486, Bartholomew Diaz rounded the Cape of Good Hope, and in 1498, 12 years later, Vasco da Gama reached Calicut in India, Calcutta in India. So we're talking about the southern part of Africa and going along that line with Mauritius and, through those islands going to India. Very soon, the Portuguese discovered that the pepper and some other spices they were seeking came from even further away. Following Arab traders from Calicut, they found their way at last to the Spice Islands or Moluccas in the East Indies. So that's one. There's a lot more to this, this is just a little taste of what it's like. Columbus crosses the Atlantic 1492. Meanwhile, a Genoese seaman named Cristoforo Colombo, had become convinced that if the world was round as Ptolemy had taught, it should be possible to reach India by sailing due west across the Atlantic Ocean. There you are, challenge to the Catholic Church. Ptolemy, Copernicus, they're the big names. Few people would listen to him, of course not. They would go against the church. But in the end, he persuaded Queen Isabella of Spain to give him 3 small ships, and she had to ask the king, of course. With this, he sailed across the Atlantic in 1492, the year in which Isabella and her husband, King Ferdinand, conquered Granada, the last foothold in Europe of the Muslim Moors. Back Islam, the Muslims, they got a big history in Spain, and so the Jews. And they lived in peace for a long time. Columbus made 3 more voyages, during the last of which he sighted the American mainland. I think it was even more, 4. So it says 3 more, But to his dying day, he thought he had found a new way to the Indian Islands. He didn't think that there was another continent there. So it wasn't named Colombia, but there was a state called Colombia. The kudos went to Amerigo Vespucci. And discovers a new world. That is why the islands of the Caribbean Sea are still called the West Indies, because of Columbus. And the Aboriginal inhabitants of America are known as Indians. There you are. He left a legacy there. In fact, of course, the great Genoese had discovered a whole new world. Somewhat unfairly, the 2 new continents were named not Colombia, but America, after a later Italian explorer called Amerigo Vespucci. There you are, done. Spanish conquest of Mexico and Peru, our debt to the Indians. Spanish soldiers, priests and colonists followed hard on the heels of the first explorers. There is no space in this book to tell you how they conquered the native Indian civilization of the Aztecs in Mexico and of the Incas in Peru. There are plenty of other books that does this, and I have quite a few. Also in Italian language. Wonderful, and also for children as well. These are important studies for young people, and who better to introduce them these new worlds to them, not through through the online availability of knowledge now, but with a book that you can touch and feel and leave on the coffee table, that doesn't move and doesn't change screen. And I've got them. So you know what to do. So Indian civilization of the Aztecs in Mexico and of the Incas in Peru, and the Maya people as well. But a glance into almost any modern shop window will remind you of at least some of the things we owe to these American Indian people. And grano turco, if it wasn't for corn, I don't know what the American food companies would do this today. Corn is everywhere. It comes from South America. Potatoes, tomatoes, maize, tobacco, cocoa, chocolate, and domesticated turkeys are all originally products of the New World. There you are. Magellan circumnavigates the world in 1519. So within less than 25 years later, in 1519 came the greatest of all voyages of discovery, Ferdinand Magellan, a Portuguese captain in the service of Spain, sailed through the straits that bear his name. Why was he working for Spain? Because they've become rich as a result. Very rich. The coffers, all the gold from the Americas. And across a broad ocean which he named the Pacific. So Magellan called the Pacific the Pacific. After a terrible voyage during which his men were reduced to scouring the hold of the ship for rats and mice to eat, he reached some islands in the East Indies which were later named the Philippines after King Philip II of Spain. And they still speak Spanish there too, apart from Tagawa. Oh my God. I told you, old age is arriving. There Magellan was killed in a fight with the natives, but his ship, the Victory, limped home to Spain after an absence of 3 years. The surviving sailors aboard her were the first human beings to circumnavigate the world. Isn't it wonderful? Englishmen discovered Newfoundland and explored the Arctic. Portuguese and Spanish discoverers were first in the field, but English, Dutch, and other seamen soon challenged them. In the year before da Gama reached Calicut, John Cabot, a Genoese skipper employed by King Henry VII of England, discovered the Newfoundland, which is sometimes called England's oldest colony. English sailors like Willoughby and Davis were made important discoveries in the Arctic regions whilst trying in vain to find a northeast passage or a northwest passage to the Spice Islands. They wanted to come from the north. Other Elizabethan seamen like Sir Francis Drake and Sir John Hawkins sailed to the Spanish Main itself, carrying on trade, piracy, or warfare according to circumstance with the Spaniards. And that went on forever. And we still have that in films now. The Caribbean, you know, the pirates. We all these wonderful people who used to fight each other in the waters. And how many treasures are buried in the sea as a result. Drake's voyage around the world, 1577. So after 1519, we got to 1577. In 1577, under Elizabeth I, Drake left England on his famous voyage around the world. After entering the Pacific, he struck north along the coast of South America, plundering Spanish ships and cities. Before the astonished enemy fairly realised what was happening, Drake had passed on as far northwards as the bay on which San Francisco now stands. So Francis Drake, San Francisco, get that? There he landed, called the place New Albion, and claimed it for his country. Crossing the Pacific by a northerly route, he called at the Moluccas on his way to England. All these people did was put a flag there, say, this is ours now, we're going to come here and invade it. That's how America got going into the modern world. And all the Neolithic people who had lived amongst themselves for millennia were overcome and had great hardships, including our Aborigines here, as a result of these invasions. But the Europeans were used to invading each other and fighting, but so did the locals here. But except because of the new arms and the new ways of, you know, organising armies, etc., they could kill people with a lot more easily and conquer them. William Adams builds the first Japanese navy. The story of William Adams is not so well known. This remarkable man went to the East Indies as pilot of a Dutch ship which performed the fourth circumnavigation of the world. From the Spice Islands, he found his way to the land of Zipangu, which Marco Polo had heard of but not seen. Adams stayed in the country for the rest of his life, married a Japanese wife, and supervised the building of the first Japanese navy. Our Tokyo Street is still named after him. So there you are, William Adams. Civilization has spread over almost the entire earth since the Renaissance. Adams went to Japan in 1600, within 200 years. Well, the year we have mentioned as making roughly the end of the Renaissance. The map on page 16, there's a map here. I might as well show you. There's this there. All the voyages are here. But you can look them up and much more easily too, and there are some in our documentaries. A lot of people have done a lot of good work for this, really. So let's go back. Adams went to Japan in 1600, the year we have mentioned, as making roughly the end of the Renaissance. The map on page 16, which I showed you, shows you much knowledge of the world was gained during the period. It also shows that Europe was beginning to spread its culture or way of living over the whole earth. But you will remember that Western civilization was not built up entirely by Europeans. Our ancestors learned much from the Romans and the Greeks, who in turn learned from the older civilization of Egypt, Iraq and the Far East. The civilization that has spread its influence to every corner of the world belongs really to all mankind. Oh. A very generous author here. Because it's true. All of mankind went all over the world. If it wasn't recorded, we don't know about it, but they did. Dutch visited Australia after 1606. If you look at a map of the world as it was known in 1600, you will see no sign of Australia, for our country was the last to be discovered by Europeans. Towards the end of the Renaissance, Dutch merchants drove the Portuguese out of the East Indies and took the trade of those islands for themselves. Then in 1606, a little Dutch ship called the Duifken, Little Dove, first sighted the Australian coast to the southwest of Cape York. In the following 100 years, many Dutch sailors, on their way to Java, sighted parts of the Western Australian shoreline. Sometimes they landed as Dirk Hartog did and looked about. But what they saw usually confirmed their belief that New Holland, as they called it, was worthless and barren country. They hadn't discovered minerals yet. They would have stayed otherwise. Dampier visits Australia in 1688. The first Englishman to see Australia thought so too. He was a well-educated man called William Dampier, the master of a pirate ship, the Signet, and he landed on the northwest coast in 1688. This is what he wrote in his journal about the Aborigines. Amidst Stone Age savages, he called them not Neolithic people, but he called them savages. And that description remained for a very long time. And that's why then the Europeans thought, well, since they're savages, they don't know anything about law and order, nations, except nationhood, culture, the way we know it, we can just take them over. And they did. The inhabitants of this country are the miserablest people in the world, which I don't agree now, because with our new knowledge, we think the Neolithic life is smaller villages, that looks after the earth in a proper way. It is a good civilization. It's not a savage civilization. We're more savages now than before. Just look at Russia, what they're doing at the moment, throwing all those missiles. Ridiculous. North Korea wanting to do the same. Iraq, Iran, I don't know what their intentions are, but, when you've got those missiles and somebody can just push a button and kills hundreds and thousands of people, that's real, truly savagery. The inhabitants of this country are the miserablest people in the world. The Hottentots of South Africa thought a nasty people, yet for wealth are gentlemen to these, who have no homes and skin garments, sheep, poultry and fruits of the earth, as the Hodmodods have. As setting aside their human shape, they differ but little from brutes, because they had their own culture. In the hot country of the north, you didn't need clothes. It must be cold, but, adaptability. They differ but little from brutes. They have no sort of clothes. They have no houses, but lie in the open air without any covering, the earth their bed and the heavens their canopy. That's beautiful. Yet primitive and ignorant as the natives were, Dampier still found something in their lives to admire. Some of his men, if they came from the poorer parts of the cities of the 17th century Europe, might even have envied the naked savages in one respect. His journal continues, sometimes they get as many fish as make them a splendid banquet, and at other times they scarce get everyone a taste. If there's scarcity, they give everyone a taste. Their communism and socialism idea. If you don't have it, you've got to help the others. You can't be selfish. But be it little or much that they get, everyone has his part. As well the young and tender, and the old and feeble, who are not able to go abroad as the strong and lusty. There you are. Amen. Armando Petrucci, welcome. So the savages were called savages in the 17th century, that's 1600 to 1699, when they visited, when the rest of the world, the Spanish, the Portuguese, the Italians always worked for other people, but the Dutch, the English, they all circumnavigated the world looking for spice and spreading their culture and the religion, etc. So, climb from savagery to civilization. This is the last paragraph, and then I will leave. You can see that the first Australians, the Aborigines, were still living the primitive food-gathering lifestyle of Paleolithic savages, about whom you learned at the beginning of this book, which I've been following, because, I had to have a direction of how do you approach world history. The best way to do it is to do it with textbooks, and then you upgrade them. And you go to other books as well. A bit of teaching here, it comes handy. As a teacher, and a very, one with language background as well, I'm attracted to these things. Dampier's men did not know, as we do, that their own ancestors, in common with all mankind, had lived in very much the same way, only about 10,000 years earlier. They did not know that the nails which fastened together the timbers of their ships were made of a metal that had been discovered thousands of years before by the ancient Egyptians. They did not know that their weapons, so superior to the stone axes of the Aborigines, were made of another metal first discovered by the Hittites. We're talking about copper and then iron ore. Dampier himself did not dream that he owed to the ancient Hindus the figures with which he worked out the position at sea of the signet, or that his calculations were made on a substance which had been invented first by the Chinese. You have now finished reading the story of man's climb from savagery, and so you can understand how and why there was such a tremendous difference between the cultures of the Aborigines and that of the first British visitors to our country. So that's the story of humanity in a nutshell. And I'm not stopping here. I've got to keep going. I've got many other books that I can refer to, but there is, it's wonderful, wonderful. And I will do a bit of revision too of the various eras of history, of the various continents. I'm really excited about all this because I personally am learning a lot. Welcome to Armando Petrucci. I'm learning a lot from history. And now we got to China. As I said, I didn't know anything about the dynasties of China, but the dynasties of China actually give us a very good idea of how the Chinese have influenced, have been able to live within their borders for a long time, except for the time under the Mongol rule, under the Great Khan, who had ambitions to overcome China on one side, and he was successful against the Song dynasty and went right to Hungary and through Russia and through Turkey. And, but as the Great Khan also, the families themselves, they had some pretty good rulers. He was a great law establisher. He was able to control his army from far away, thousands of kilometers, with his very harsh rules. Anyone that didn't agree with him, they got killed, and they didn't matter. So we're talking now. I want to talk about the Zhou dynasty, 1100 to 256 before Christ. So that's about 700-800 years. Okay, the superior culture of the Shang naturally spread to the tribes around, and it was one of these, the Zhou, who by the 11th century BC had learned enough from their masters to be able to detain them. The Zhou, Z-H-O-U, had lived to the west of the Shang, Shang, in the valley of the Wei, Wei, one of the main tributaries of the Yellow River. Their position was virtually that of a buffer state between civilization and barbarism. Again, Neolithic type of living, Paleolithic type of nomad living. That's what the Mongols, they love that, the freedom of the steppes. A situation which on several occasions in early Chinese history proved ideal for a career of conquests. So the armies went out and conquered more land. The Zhou were able to learn the art of diplomacy and sophisticated warfare from their luxurious neighbours down the valley to the east, whilst the marauding nomads in the mountains on the other three sides both kept them on their mettle and gave them an added impulse to expand into those greener pastures. It has even been suggested that in earlier centuries the Zhou had themselves been the barbarians who were from time to time rounded up as flesh and blood for the Shang sacrifices. If so, there was a certain poetic justice in their victory. So the Shang people, you know, in the religion, the old religion, they would pick up some of these Zhou people and would cut them up and, you know, sacrifice them to their gods. That's enough of the Zhou for now. You know, I just want to know a little bit about each dynasty, okay? And you're getting the benefit of it. Now, this one here is Song Tsen Gampo and Princess Wen Cheng. I need a drink, badly. The Tuba people were the ancestors of the Tibetan people, Tuba, T-U-B-O, you can look it up. They appeared on the Qinghai-Tibet plateau at a very early period. They were farmers and herders. In the early 7th century, Songtsen Gampo united the various Tuba tribes and made Luoxi, today's Lhasa, the capital of the Tuba kingdom. Songtsen Gampo admired the culture of the Tang dynasty and was eager to form an alliance with a powerful empire. In 641, Emperor Taizong sent Princess Wen Cheng to him as his bride. That's how they used to do the diplomacy before. The Tuba people used to live in tents. It is said that the gorgeous palace was built especially for her, which was the predecessor of today's Potala Palace. Princess Wen Cheng took with her to Tuba medicines, books on science and technology, grain and vegetable seeds, and exquisite handicrafts of the Tang dynasty. In addition, people were proficient in raising silkworms, making wine and paper, and weaving and embroidering accompanied her to teach these arts to the people of Tibet. Princess Wencheng was an ardent believer in Buddhism. It is said that the location of the Jokhang temple was chosen by her. Princess Wencheng lived in Tuba for 40 years, making great contributions to the friendship between the Han and Tibetan peoples. She is still remembered and loved by the Tibetans. Statues of Princess Wencheng are preserved in the Jokhang Temple and Potala Palace. There are many beautiful legends told about Princess Wencheng among the Tibetan people. So there you are. So I'm going to show you the pictures of these people. This is this one here is Songtsen Gampo, that one, and this is Princess Wencheng. And that's the palace that they built for her in Tibet. So when you look at history and you look at Tibet, and they say Tibet want nothing to do with China. How can you, when there's a history like this? But this, don't forget, this Chinese history written by the Chinese, not by the Tibetan. Because they say, we were here way before. We just wanted to be friends. We don't want to be ruled by you. Oh dear. Oh well, never mind. Now I have to be quick here because I've got Africa to do and then Australia. It's taken me longer than I wanted. But anyway, I'm going to show you. At least I'm going to show you here. There we are. Hoopla. Okay, here we go. Here we go. See that? We've done South Africa, Lesotho and Swaziland. We talked about Botswana, Namibia, Zimbabwe and Mozambique. The next lot is Malawi, Zambia and Angola. Okay? And that, we're moving northward towards Egypt. Okay? But each one of these nations have got a history. Okay, now I've done that. I'm going to talk about them now because I looked them up. Here we go. The first one is Malawi. Malawi is a republic in Central Africa in 1859 when Livingstone, 1813 to 1873, Livingstone died at the age of 60. Wow. When he first saw Lake Nyasa, the fertile land around had been turned into a wilderness by the Arab slave trade, which was destroying African tribal society. Slaves were captured to make the long haul of ivory overland. Steamers on the lake would make this unnecessary. Livingstone reports led to the establishment of mission stations, two of which were named after him, and the African Lakes Company was set up to put down the slave trade and develop peaceful trade. Finally, in 1891, the British government reluctantly took over responsibility for Nyasa land. It remained an agricultural country, many of whose people sought work in the Rhodesias and South Africa. Communications were a big problem, and in order to provide an outlet for Nyasa land exports, a railway was completed in 1915. Port Harold to Chindi on the north bank of the Zambezi. 7 years later, another was opened from Beira to the south of the river. In 1593, Nyasa land was federated with the Rhodesias despite African opposition. 6 years later, the situation became so serious that a state of emergency was declared. Agitation continued, and in 1963, the Central African Federation broke up. Nyasa land, now called Malawi, became independent under the leadership of Dr. Hastings Banda, 1905, and in 1966, a republic within the Commonwealth. So that's Malawi for you. Okay? Then we've got here, we've got Zambia. Zambia, republic, formerly Northern Rhodesia, bounded in the north by Zaire and Tanzania, in the south by the Zambezi, which forms its boundary with Zimbabwe and the Caprivi Strip, and in the east by Angola. The chief exports are copper, cobalt, vanadium, zinc, lead and tobacco, with copper predominating so greatly that the economy is dependent on it. The greater part of the country lies 4,000 feet, 1,220 metres or more above sea level, which tempers what would otherwise be a tropical climate. It is watered by great rivers, among them the Zambezi, which thunders a mile wide over the 360-foot, 110 metres Victoria Falls near Livingstone, spreads into Lake Kariba, then shoots through the great sluices of the Kariba Dam on its way to Mozambique. What a beautiful place, Zambia. Mountainous, with big lakes, big rivers, big cascades. Wow. Tell you what, we don't talk about them too often. The country has a very long history, and important prehistoric settlements have been discovered. The Bantu people, who now form the majority of the population, invaded from the 17th century onwards, to be followed by the Arab, Zulu and Basutu tribes. Portuguese expeditions in the 18th and early 19th centuries led to a great deal of slave traffic. Livingstone explored the territory in the 1850s and came upon the Victoria Falls. Later, the British South Africa Company, 1889 to 1900, virtually took over control. The British Crown assumed administration in 1924, following a unification of the country as Northern Rhodesia. Northern Rhodesia with Southern Rhodesia and Nyasaland formed the experimental Central African Federation in August 1954. This broke up in 1963, however, and on the 24th of October 1964, Northern Rhodesia became the independent Republic of Zambia, with Dr. Kenneth Kaunda as head of state. So Northern Rhodesia now is Zambia. Zanzibar, former British protectorate, now part of the United Republic of Tanzania, comprising the islands of Zanzibar, Pemba, Lamu, Manda, Pata and Siu. The principal town is Zanzibar. The islands supply most of the world's cloves and clove oil. Okay, so that was Zanzibar. I haven't done it, but it's next to Zambia, I might as well. No, I'll come back to this, to Zanzibar another time. I haven't got time today. And, you know, I have a book called World History, so it's not bad at all. Good for me. It's, you know, things will become better as we go along. Now, this one here, this is Angola. Angola is a southern African nation whose varied terrain encompasses tropical Atlantic beaches, a labyrinthine system of rivers, and sub-Saharan desert that extends across the border into Namibia. The country's colonial history is reflected in its Portuguese-influenced cuisine and its landmarks, including Fortaleza de São Miguel, a fortress built by the Portuguese in 1576 to defend the capital, Luanda. Wow, there's much more. Okay, well, Angola, you can look it up. So we've done 3 more countries of Africa. Okay, so the geography part is very, very important. What the mountains, the rivers, the lakes that are there, the climate, the desert areas, the fertile lands, all this come to play. And so the wars come about from when you say, this is mine, then you want, you know, if you're on water, you can't go there. So what are you going to do? You're going to fight them. But if you lived peacefully, then you could get the water. That's how it is. Okay. So that's Africa for this week. And now to our, we did last week, we did the arts and crafts of our Indigenous people, but they also have songs and stories. If we want to hear a story, we must go to a book and read it. The Aboriginal people in Australia did not have books, but they did have paintings which could be read. The artist-writer painted a story in images and symbols on a piece of bark, a bit like in the old times. Neolithic people did it. Any educated Aborigine of that group could read it. Apart from this, stories were told and listened to rather than written and read. This happened in many other cultures, of course, and they're all forgotten too. It wasn't for the writing. So the colonials, thank you colonials for going around the world and writing the stories of the indigenous people of the world. A good storyteller's face and gestures and drawings in the sand made much more of a tale than just bare words on paper. Storytellers and songmen were renowned and welcomed everywhere because they're fun, you know. Without the arts and crafts, what are we? Many Aboriginal myths and legends as a source of history. The last eruption of Mount Gambier thousands of years ago, when it was an active volcano, is described in a legend. All over Mount Gambier, I visited twice for weddings. Border of South Australia and Victoria. All over the southern eastern region of Australia, stories were told about the ancestors called Eagle, Hawk and Crow. They were always fighting and quarrelling with each other. In part of the myth, the active craters of the volcano are described as the camp fires of the two characters. Knowing the date of the volcano, we can date this story back at least 6,000 years. Another story describes the total eclipse of the sun in South Australia in 1793. Another story from the area near the mouth of the Murray River seems to describe the coming to Earth of a meteorite. And we're going to stop there. So there you are, meteorite, eclipse of the sun, volcano, eruption, all in the legends of the Aboriginal people. We'll continue with this next week, of course. And now, these other two mates of ours, well, this one here, this is called Driver Smith. I'll continue from last week. That was Smith with his ambulance. That's where we left off. They opened fire on the mountainside, a peppering by and large. When over the hill above their flank, the Boers came down at the charge. They rushed the guns with a daring rush, a volleying left and right, and Driver Smith with his ambulance moved up to the edge of the fight. The gunners stuck to their guns like men and fought like the wildcats fight. For a batteryman don't leave his gun with ever hope in sight. But the bullets sank and the Moses cracked and the batteryman gave way, till Driver Smith with his ambulance drove into the thick of the fray. He saw the head of the Transvaal troop a thundering to and fro, a hard old face with a monkey beard, a face that he seemed to know. Now, who's that leader, said Driver Smith. I've seen him before today. Why, bless my heart, but it's Kruger's self, and he jumped for him straight away. He collared old Kruger round the waist and hustled him into the van. It wasn't according to stretcher drill for racing a wounded man, but he forced him in and said, all aboard, we're off for a little ride, and you'll have the car to yourself, says he. I reckon we are full inside. He wheeled his team on the mountainside and set them a merry pace, galloping over the rocks and stones, and a lot of the Boers gave a chase. But Driver Smith had a fairish start, and he said to the Boers, good day, you have Buckley's chance for to catch a man that was trained in Battery A. Beautiful. He drove his team to the hospital and said to the PMO, beg pardon, sir, but I missed a trip, mistaken the way to go. Welcome to Francis Gullo. And Kruger came to the ambulance and asked, could we spare a bed? So I fetched him here and we'll take him home to show for a bob ahead. So the word went round to the English troops to say they need fight no more, for Driver Smith with his ambulance had ended the blooming war because he helped the enemy. And in London there at the music halls, he's starring it every night and drawing £100 a week to tell how he won the fight. Isn't that beautiful? The Boers came to an end because an ambulance guy helped the enemy. Well done, Benja. Henry Lawson. Now, this one here is called Hungerford. Okay, so Hungerford is from the open fire on the mountains. Unbelievable. When I can't remember, where is it now? Where is it? Where are you? Where are you? I think here. Well, blow me. It's page, all right. Just 1 second. We'll get there. We'll get there. We'll get there. Where are you? Oh, I can't believe this. Hungerford from, oh, that's Benja. Okay, I'm going to start here. Only about 60% of the sugar will melt. Okay. We saw one of the storekeepers give a deadbeat swagman 5 shillings worth of rations to take him on into Queensland. The storekeepers often do this and put it down on the lost side of their books. I hope the recording angel listens and puts it down on the right side of this book. We camped on the Queensland side of the fence, and after tea had a yarn with an old man who was minding a mixed flock of goats and sheep, and we asked him whether he thought Queensland was better than New South Wales or the other way around. He scratched the back of his head and thought a while and hesitated like a stranger who is going to do you a favour at some personal inconvenience. At last, with the bored air of a man who has gone through the same performance too often before, he stepped deliberately up to the fence and spat over it into New South Wales. After which he got Leslie through and spat back on Queensland. That's what I think of the blanky colonies, he said. He didn't like the division. He gave us time to become sufficiently impressed. Then he said, and if I was at the Victorian and South Australian border, I'd do the same thing. He let that soak into our minds and added, and the same with West Australia and Tasmania. Then he went away. So in other words, Australia's Australia. None of these states or councils or whatever. The last would have been a long spit, and he forgot Maori land. We heard afterwards that his name was Clancy, and he had that day been offered a job driving at 25 shillings a week and find your own horse. Also find your own horse feed and tobacco and soap and other luxuries at station prices. Moreover, if you lost your own horse, you would have to find another, and if that died or went astray, you would have to find a third or forfeit your pay and return on foot. The bus driver agreed to provide flour and mutton when such things were procurable. Consequently, Clancy decidedly unfavourable opinion of the colonies. My mate and I sat down and on our swags against the fence to talk things over. One of us was very deaf. Presently a black tracker went past and looked at us and returned to the pub. Then a trooper in Queensland uniform came along and asked us what the trouble was about and where we came from and where we were going and where we camped. We said we were discussing private business, and he explained that he thought it was a row, and came over to see. Then he left us, and later on we saw him sitting with the rest of the population on a bench under the hotel veranda. Next morning we rolled up our swags and left Hungerford to the northwest. Welcome to Jeanette Tarasha. We just finished with Hungerford, the story from Henry Lawson's short stories, and we also did Benja Patterson. And of course, now we're going to go to the north. Where are we? To the north we go. Just 1 second. Let's we go. We go to Broome now. We're going to go to Broome. Well, yes. Here we are. We're in Broome. Cheers. Okay. Here we go. Lovely part. This is Broome. This is where we left off last week. There we are, Tom and Angela. Now we keep going. And then we started to walk towards what they call the staircase to heaven. That's the moon. There's the staircase. And these are the rocks. On the rocks, some of the people looking at me. Up, here we are. More people waiting for the staircase. Here. Oh, that's a good one. How come I missed it? What happened here? Ah, this is the walk. When you walk, okay, that's the next lot. These are the people around, waiting for the moon to create the staircase to heaven. There it is there. We'll go a bit forward. More. The staircase is starting to show. There it is. Quite a few people. It's quite a tourist attraction. There it is. Broome. You have to be patient with these things. Did I say anything? Yes. Oh, that's a picture. Why did I say something? Never mind. See, that's on the water. Interesting. That was just a picture. Beautiful. As time goes by, the steps. There, getting closer and closer. It's a full staircase. Look at that. with Angela. We were happy to have seen it. Another one of our friends. Oh, look at that. Beautiful golden. Lovely. Oh, that was one of the singers at a club. That's where we stayed. Beautiful part. This is Broome, the garden part. And look at that. There's our old tree, baobab tree. Beautiful trees, absolutely gorgeous. Broome Primary School. And this is on the way the next day. This is on the way to the church. I'll get to the church and then that's the next morning here. Catholic parish house. We'll stop it there. Okay, because we got to 12:30 and I want to say something. Well, we are getting, today was the last bit where I had, from now on, I will look at history from the times of Christopher Columbus. That was the 15th century. The 16th century will be 1,500 to 1,599. So I'll take the world. It'll change. Everything changes now with history because the civilizations clash, if you like. The European civilization clashes with the Neolithic, and what are the consequences of this, and what happened to those countries? So it requires a little bit more, research as well. But I think I might continue. I thought I'd stop. But I think I might just continue and build it up in a different way. But it was stopping at Christopher Columbus. I'll give myself 2 more lessons up to 65, and then I will take a break because I want to have a good idea of how to approach now this new type of world history where the world is known to humanity, or most of it, because this, Antarctica didn't know. The North Pole, yes, they didn't know about it. The Vikings did, but the South Pole, no one knew about it. So that came later. Okay, so on that note, thank you very much for coming on today. I want to wish you all a very, very good end of the year 2022. We've had our beautiful Christmas with our families, and now it's time to say goodbye to what we've done during the year and look forward to 2023. May you be healthy, in peace, prosperous, and with harmony with all that is around us. And let's look after our backyard, our own areas, and the planet. We're all responsible for it. So we better do something about how we're going to proceed. As I said before, Neolithic people, villages, etc., wasn't a bad idea, but you can't go backwards. So on that note, Happy New Year to you all for 2023. I'll see you in the new year. Ciao from Tom Padula of TomPadulaTV on YouTube and Insegna Booksellers. And now it's finished. I must not forget to do it right.